invitation, and thanks for coming out on a luckily not that rainy, it is Thursday evening. As I was prepping for this, I messaged Maggie, who had very good grace towards me when I said, Trump's war, Starmer's war, stop the war. I was like, which war? any particular war? And Maggie gracefully gave me free rein, because and I raise it because actually the question of when we say stop the war right now, like that feels like quite an overwhelming question, or an overwhelming statement, and much of what Chris was talking about was about the genocide in Gaza, and I recognise and know many faces from that movement, but that is not the only war that is ongoing at the moment in which the UK is involved in some way, predominantly as a junior partner to a United States that is just, increasingly nakedly exercising violence and exercising domination. So we could talk about the war in Ukraine. We could talk about the war on Venezuela. We could talk about the potential for war against Iran. I found it interesting when Chris talked about, that it's protesters in Minneapolis who show us that the tide can be turned. I also think we have a lot to learn from those in countries like Iran. I think Iranian protesters, if they can turn the tide against the clerics, they're kind of caught at the moment between the clerics and a possible return of the monarchy. We think we've got it bad here. The tide can always be turned. And I was mildly heartened by a headline that I saw before I left campus, which was saying that the government had not agreed for the US to use the UK base at Diego Garcia to launch an attack on Iran, which kind of surprised me given the way UK decision making is going at the moment. So there are a plethora of wars that are ongoing that I think are connected to each other and to us in a myriad of ways. And I think one of the things that connects them is this role of the UK as a junior partner in a way to the US, in a way that the UK government sort of, sometimes I wonder about what seems to me like a tone deafness of the British government, when I think, don't they realise that everyone thinks that's a stupid idea? And I was like, oh, maybe we're not the audience. Which is also the same, I think, with this potential of whether the CPS are going to try and reopen the trials against the Filton protesters. To me, it's absurd. It's obvious that legally they should never have even been able to bring those cases, let alone win them. But when they say that they might try and seek retrial, I'm like, oh, we're not the audience for that. So who is the audience? I think the UK is desperate to appease the United States, and these sort of crass, old rubbish arguments about, you've got to be in the tent to influence things. You've got to, be in it to be able to leverage things, to be able to influence. How's that going for you? I think sort of shows us that we are suffering a government of really very little political backbone, conviction, or imagination and skill, frankly. I think the other audience also is a domestic one, is a right-wing domestic audience, that Labour, in seeking to pursue a kind of centrist policy of, you've got to gain power and be in power to make progressive change, have allowed themselves to shift so far to the right that they are sort of increasingly unrecognisable from what many of us could consider an extremely right-wing government, which I think speaks volumes about how our mainstream politics is going. So if we think about, okay, how do we stop all the wars, then I think we need to talk about militarism and militarisation, and we need to challenge both the politics and the political economy of that. So when we think about things like the commitments to increase defence spending, we were all outraged. I just feel like we spent all our time just being either outraged or depressed. We were outraged when the government said they were going to increase defence spending, and now they're saying we're going to increase it even faster than we said we would. The question, it's one thing to disagree. The one thing I really hate is when they take us for fools. What is that money going to be spent on? There is absolutely no political content to those claims about increasing defence spending. It's grandstanding. It's a statement that is driven by the desire to appease the United States. but what's it going to be spent on? Like, there's no content to it. But we also can guess what it's going to be spent on. It's going to be spent on weapons systems, weapons platforms. And there's one thing that's really wrong with that, and one thing that's really sad about that. The thing that's really wrong with that is that is basically money into the shareholders' pockets of the asset managers and investment firms that increasingly own the British arms industry. Right? So that is money that we pay for the R&D, the research and development, out of our taxes, and the companies appropriate the profit privately, and that profit increasingly goes into the shareholders' pockets of companies like BlackRock, the other one, the name escapes me, but the asset managers. So that is they talk about trickle down economics. This is like siphon up economics. Our money is going to their pockets. The thing that's sad about it is that it's not as if there aren't problems in the world that we might actually need to think about a military response to. Like, I am not at all sanguine about Russia's foreign policy. I don't have a political programme that I can lay out to you. I do not think that European rearmament and remilitarisation is the way, or the only, is the way to respond. I do think there is a question about what do we mean by defence? The UK, historically, when we say defence, what the government and our political elites mean is power projection. It means intervention overseas. It means being seen as a global power. But if we're serious about defence, what would it mean to defend the United Kingdom? And then what are our obligations to our European friends and allies? Like, they're difficult questions, but we are so far away from being able to have a meaningful, mature political debate about it, because everything is kind of overlaid with this sort of desire to have a sort of a corporate and tech solution to everything. Spend more money on weapons, that will fix it. How has that worked out for you? And also the British state's desire to be seen, this idea of punching above our weight, being seen as a global player. Like, how about we just admit it, we're kind of like this shitty little country, and that's fine. Like, we're perfectly happy around here. Like, we could just mind our own business a bit more, right? I think that, vote for me. We should mind our own business a bit more. It's that. I think there's a lot to be said for that. And the other thing that I think is quite interesting for us when we think about, well, what can I do? We also know that on an everyday basis, the one thing that really worries most people is the cost of living crisis, right? And I also know that there is sometimes this argument about, oh, you activists, you're all concerned with your foreign wars over there, but like, what about here? But actually, those two things are connected. Why can't my kid get the SEND provision they need at school? Why can't I get an appointment with a hospital consultant in anything less than a year? Why can't, you will all have your examples, why can't we get those things that we pay our taxes for? Who is making the decisions and where is the money going? And that is where I think the question ties into questions of defence, that you don't need to be, particularly, it's not as if like all this foreign policy stuff, that's for people who've got loads of spare time, who can afford not to think about the cost of living crisis. We are all being affected by austerity and cost of living crisis, because there's austerity for everybody except the militarists and everybody except the corporates. So that, I think, is the connecting point. So if you've got friends and family who maybe aren't on exactly the same political wavelength as you, or a bit like, well, whatever it is they're going to say, that, I think, the cost of living crisis, that's your entry point. That's the point at which we can have conversations with people about, like, what are we spending our money on? I think I'll just say one last thing, which is about the right to protest. I think, we've had the victory in the judicial review of the proscription of Palestine action, in which the judges found that, although they were deeply critical of Palestine action, they said that the government's move to proscribe them as a terrorist organisation sort of went beyond what was necessary and was indeed an infringement of freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. and that there are existing criminal laws that could be used to have dealt with them, which anybody who takes direct action, that's part of the consideration that people go through when they decide whether they can do that or not. So that was one victory. We had the acquittal of the first 6 of the Filton 24. We've had the dropping of the aggravated burglary charges against the other 18. We've had some of them have been released already, some of them are seeking release, and this question of whether the CPS will seek a retrial, I think, will be quite an interesting litmus test of what happens in that. My hope always is that tide is turning, and that again, depending on this question of audience, who the government's audience is with this, is that they might decide that actually let's not pursue something that we're obviously not going to win and that we're going to be politically embarrassed by. I think one of the things that we should also sort of start drawing some of the connections to is around things like immigration rates. And the reason I say that is we sort of watch what's happening in the United States, in Minneapolis, and it looks absolutely terrifying, and we hope that it will never happen here. But I would not underestimate the speed with which something like that could start to happen here. And Chris rightly was talking about the absolutely heroic efforts of local organisers in Minneapolis. And the thing that I would say about that is that's because they've got deep roots in community organising. You can't just spring up that sort of community defence response out of nowhere. And one of the things I love about Brighton in particular is the depth of roots we've got around things like not just migrant solidarity, not just refugee support, but also other things around like education, health, and so on. So I think, again, things that we can do, things that we can sort of take with us as we leave tonight, are things around, well, when I say, well, something ought to be done, what am I doing? What are all the people that I know? Who are the 3 biggest moaners that I know? What are they doing? Ask them. Like, what are you doing? Like, where are you volunteering? What time? And if you haven't got time, what money can you give? But also, do you know your neighbours? If an immigration raid, I get all these Instagram things about what to do if you see an immigration raid. It's terrifying. I don't feel equipped to walk up to a potential immigration raid and be like, excuse me, I've read the thing about what I can ask them, but that's a really scary thing to do if you've never done it before and you're not. So get to know your neighbours, get to know what the issues that are worrying them. Start, I know everyone here, is really involved in the community. That's exactly the sort of thing that we need to keep growing, because I think the way we win for a future in which we can all be safe and all flourish is to work at both ends. It's to work sort of making the political demands of government, like don't do this, don't do that, don't waste my taxes on weapons, but it's also at the other end. It's about who are we connected to and who are we going to defend as and when we need to. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.